From a scientific standpoint, stories affect the human brain profoundly. Neuroscientists have discovered that when we hear a story, our brain responds as though we are experiencing the events ourselves. This phenomenon, known as neural coupling, allows the listener to connect emotionally with the story. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about science. Specifically, the science behind why people connect with one another and relate through story. Storytelling has been a part of communication since the creation of man, a tradition passed down orally before written language existed. The profound effect of stories on the human brain and community dynamics has been extensively researched in both theology and science. Today, I want to explore the intersection of those two fields, drawing from the insights of theologians, neuroscientists, and thinkers such as Dr. Curt Thompson, C.S. Lewis, Robert McKee, Pastor Fred Craddock, and some early church fathers. By examining the impact of storytelling on faith communities, we gain a deeper understanding of how stories shape our identities, relationships, and our understanding of God. Storytelling is crucial to the human experience, especially within faith communities. Stories are more than just methods of communication. They are ways of organizing and understanding life's complexities. Dr. Curt Thompson, a psychiatrist working at the intersection of neuroscience and Christian spiritual formation, argues that life is actually formation. The question is, what are the forces to which we are submitting that are forming us? Stories, whether personal testimonies or communal narratives, are part of this formation process. They shape the ways individuals relate to themselves, to others, and to God. Thompson's work highlights the connection between storytelling and neurobiology, suggesting that the human brain is designed to process and respond to stories in unique ways. In Anatomy of the Soul, he discusses how understanding the brain through the lens of neuroscience allows us to engage more deeply with both God and others. He explores the idea that narrative can help shape not only individual lives, but also entire communities, particularly faith communities that thrive on shared stories of redemption and hope. From a scientific standpoint, stories affect the human brain profoundly. Neuroscientists have discovered that when we hear a story, our brain responds as though we are experiencing the events ourselves. This phenomenon, known as neural coupling, allows the listener to connect emotionally with the story. Stories engage multiple areas of the brain simultaneously, from the language centers that process the words to the sensory areas that respond to vivid imagery and emotion. When we hear or tell a story, the parts of our brain responsible for emotional connection are activated, making us more likely to empathize and feel connected to the characters and messages within the narrative. In the context of faith, stories do more than entertain or convey information. They form the backbone of religious identity. Thompson notes that the gospel is the declaration of the reality of relationship, an invitation to be known and to know others. Through stories, we experience not just intellectual understanding, but emotional and relational connections to God and to the people around us. This insight into the neurobiological or neurological impact of story highlights why storytelling is so effective in faith communities. Whether through personal testimonies, biblical narratives, or communal experiences, stories help people feel known, understood, and connected. Theological thinkers have long recognized the power of story to communicate deep spiritual truths. C.S. Lewis, one of the most famous Christian apologists of the 20th century, understood this well. His use of allegory in the Chronicles of Narnia demonstrated how stories can convey profound theological ideas in ways that engage both the intellect and emotions. Lewis believed that storytelling was a way to bypass the limitations of direct argumentation, appealing to the imagination and emotions to communicate deeper truths. In his essay, Myth Became Fact, Lewis argued that stories, especially myths, reveal truths about the human condition that are often inaccessible through pure logic. He viewed stories as a means of communicating the divine in a way that resonates with the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. According to Lewis, the heart of Christianity is a myth which became fact. By becoming fact, it does not cease to be a myth. That is the miracle. He recognized that stories could bridge the gap between the rational mind and the emotional heart, allowing people to experience and engage with theological concepts on a deeper level. Oral tradition or story-centric communication has been the bedrock of communication in human history, particularly before the Enlightenment period. To this day, 70% of the world communicates through orality communication. In ancient cultures, including early Christian communities, stories were passed down orally, preserving essential teachings and communal identity. The early church fathers understood the importance of story in transmitting faith, doctrine, and tradition. Augustine of Hippo, in his Confessions, provides one of the earliest examples of a Christian leader using personal narrative to explore theological concepts. Augustine's autobiographical storytelling set a precedent for how personal testimony could be used to communicate spiritual transformation and growth. The use of oral tradition allowed stories to be shared widely and memorably. In cultures where literacy was rare, the oral transmission of stories ensured that critical information, such as the teachings of Jesus, could be passed down through generations. Story-centric communication not only preserved the history and theology of the early church, but also fostered a sense of community. In his reflections on the nature of memory, Augustine wrote, "Great is this force of memory, excessively great, O my God. It is a large and boundless chamber within me." For him, the act of remembering and retelling stories was an integral part of spiritual formation and community life. Storytelling in faith communities also benefits from an understanding of story structure, as articulated by figures like Robert McKee, a renowned expert in narrative theory. McKee emphasizes that storytelling is a ritual that allows people to reflect on their values and experiences, organizing them in ways that bring meaning and coherence. He argues that stories are the creative conversion of life itself into a more powerful, clearer, more meaningful experience. McKee's analysis of story structure can be applied to biblical narratives and sermons, where the dramatic arc of conflict, resolution, and redemption mirrors the cyclical human spiritual journey. In faith communities, the structure of a well-told story can have a profound impact on how individuals and groups understand their own spiritual narratives. McKee's insights into story structure help preachers and spiritual leaders create sermons and teachings that resonate on both an emotional and intellectual level. This is particularly true when considering the parables of Jesus, which follow many of the same principles that McKee identifies, using simple and powerful stories to convey complex spiritual truths. Fred Craddock, a renowned preacher and professor of homiletics, further developed the concept of storytelling in preaching. Craddock pioneered the method of narrative preaching, where stories form the backbone of sermons, making abstract theological concepts accessible and relatable. His narrative preaching approach was designed to draw listeners into the biblical story, helping them see themselves as part of God's redemptive work. Craddock's philosophy of preaching aligns with what modern neuroscience suggests about storytelling's power. By telling stories, Craddock created emotional connections between his audience and the biblical narrative, fostering a deeper understanding of the gospel. His approach made the message more memorable and engaging, reinforcing the idea that stories are not just vehicles for conveying information, but are central to human experience and spiritual formation. Additionally, his approach helped his audience understand their story and how it is a part of God's larger redemptive narrative. At the core of storytelling's power is its ability to evoke emotion. According to Thompson, emotion is the very energy around which the brain organizes itself. Without emotion, life would come to a standstill. This is particularly relevant in faith communities, where stories of personal transformation, testimonies of faith, and narratives of redemption stir deep emotional responses in listeners. These emotions help forge connections between individuals and between individuals and God. The ability of stories to evoke emotion is also why they are so effective in transmitting values and beliefs. Neuroscience shows that emotions are key to memory formation. which explains why stories are more memorable than abstract concepts. In faith communities, stories are used not only to teach, but to inspire and motivate individuals to live out the values of their faith. From both a theological and neurobiological perspective, storytelling plays a crucial role in shaping the human experience, particularly within faith communities. Whether through the oral traditions of the early church, the allegories of C.S. Lewis, or the narrative preaching of Fred Craddock, as much as we've lost the art of storytelling in the church in the West, stories serve as the primary means of conveying spiritual truth and forming community. Dr. Curt Thompson's insights into the intersection of neuroscience and spiritual formation highlight how stories impact not just the mind, but the body and soul, creating connections that form the foundation of communal and personal faith. As science continues to uncover the neurological underpinnings of storytelling, it becomes increasingly clear why stories have been such a vital part of human history. In faith communities, storytelling is more than just a way to pass the time. It is a means of creating meaning, fostering relationships, and connecting and relating with God. By understanding the power of story, we can engage more deeply with our own faith narratives and the stories of those around us, becoming part of the larger story of God's redemptive work in the world. Thanks for listening.